There were a few changes that are in place because of Legislative Bill 17 that passed last spring. Changed some things with the amortization, some court fee and funding issues for the judges plan. So those are in place. And then things every year things do not happen as we expect. And in particular this year, the notable item is the investment return is about 30%. That makes things look a lot better. We've told many of my systems, you keep getting 30% every year, we'll keep giving you really good reports. So that will come through in a number of places this year. Now, as you probably recall, we don't recognize all of that return at once. We smooth the assets so we don't overreact. And so on the smooth value, the actuarial value, it was still about an 11.5% return, still well above the expected amount. Now, kind of going the other way, because of what inflation was, the actual COLAs were 2.5%. Our assumption's 2.25%, so that works against us a little bit. There were some other kind of odds and ends, but the big picture is things look good because we made a lot of money. On slide 4, just kind of a reminder of how we are working on the assumption changes. We're actually phasing the economic changes in over 4 years. The board thought that made more sense to kind of bring things in gradually, try to avoid sudden jumps in contribution that might be more artificial by recognizing everything at once. And so you can see we're moving, inflation's going down from 2.75 was our assumption. We're headed down to 2.35, moving a little bit each year. The rate of return, the real rate of return is we moved a little bit, it will stay constant, but the total rate of return will move down because it's the sum of the real return and inflation and assumptions there for some of the other payroll and COLA items. So again, we're moving in. There may be a reaction. Hold on, what's going on with inflation right now? Well, we'll see. Okay, we have had a year with some high inflation, but these are long-term assumptions, and so for at least now, we're just wanting to wait and see what happens. On page 5, just kind of a reminder of our actuarial asset methodology, where we take what's happened and we smooth it in. So this year, we're reflecting that there was a $2 billion excess in 2021, but we still got $377 million loss from 2020 to recognize and less from the prior years. The smoothing method helps because one of the things that tends to happen, not absolute by any means, but when markets go up, they come back down a little bit, or when they go down, they come back up. There's kind of this cyclical or oscillating type thing, and you can see over the past 4 years, 2 years we've made more than expected, 2 years we made less than expected. And so by trying to smooth this out, we hope to present kind of filter out some noise and have a clearer picture of where we really stand. And so that's kind of the history there. On slide 6, you really can see the impact. There's a blue line that bounces all over the place. That's what happened on a market value basis. High years, low years, up and down. The red line in there reflects what we reflected as an actuarial value of assets. So much smoother. It does go up and down, but it stays a little more steady compared to the black line then, which is what the assumption is. So again, just to kind of help explain what we're doing here. So we'll talk about the judges system first. So we'll get to slide 8, some key numbers. The first row there, the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. Last year was about 5.5 million. This year it's negative 1.5 million. Now, just real quick, what does this mean? This is, when we talk about the actuarial accrued liability, it's our target. It's where we'd like to be if actuaries could rule the world and have everything play out exactly as designed, this is the number we'd like to have in the bank. It's not all the money we'll ever need. We still have people earning benefits. We're going to need more money coming in for them each year. But it's where we would be if everything were on target and everything playing out exactly as desired. So what we've, compared to last year, we're now a little bit ahead of schedule. This doesn't mean we have too much money, it just means we're ahead of schedule, by $1.5 million. And so the funded ratio, where we compare, take that liability or divide the assets by the liability, we're just over 100%. So again, 100.7, we're just slightly ahead of schedule. And so that's a good place to be. We haven't been there for a while. We've had a rough go the last few years, but we're now slightly ahead of schedule. The actuarial contribution rate is the percentage of payroll that we calculate as being needed to help us keep moving. It involves the benefits being earned. It involves, if you will, kind of truing up where we are to where we'd like to be. So in this case, we can take a little bit of credit from that being ahead of schedule. That rate is lower, largely because we're no longer trying to play catch up. We have a little bit of extra. When we factor in what the members are contributing, that number's up a little bit because new judges contribute a little higher rate than the older judges. And so we have a non-member actual rate. That's what we have to collect from other sources. In the case of judges, that's coming in from court fees, and then the state makes a contribution as well. When we look at what we expect from court fees after the reflection of LB 17 and the increase there, a year ago we needed the state to put in 1.4 million. This year it's about 232,000. So a smaller amount coming from the state to fund the judge's plan. Slide 9, just kind of a graphical representation of where we are and where we're headed. If all assumptions are met, they won't be, but under our best estimate at this point, for the next 5 years, we anticipate that court fees will be sufficient to fund the plan, that we will not need any additional state contributions. Now, to be honest, because of where we're sitting right on the edge, if markets don't do as expected, if something else happens, I absolutely do not want to guarantee this by any means, but this is our best estimate at this point, but where you sit, it can vary. On the other hand, we did move the right direction this year, going from 1.4 additional state requirement to 200,000. On slide 10, actually, we think that's not just for the next 5 years, but longer term. Again, a part of what we have going on here is we're recognizing the deferred gains that right now we're not recognizing all the asset gains that occurred last year. So if those flow through and we don't have any correction and all of that, we actually would anticipate for a number of years to kind of run smoothly. But slide 11 is the what if it doesn't happen, because I think in all fairness, we have to consider or help present what happened. And so we show 3 scenarios here. The current, everything plays out as desired. What if fiscal year 2022 has a 0% return on the market value? And what if fiscal year 2022 has a minus 10% return? Minus 10% would be pretty severe, but just wanted to, again, kind of give some sense of what could happen. And you can see the red and the black bars are only there for 2021. So even if we have a 0% return, we think there's a reasonable chance, if everything else plays out as expected, a 0% return in 2022 followed by the 7+ return expected for the next several years. No additional state contributions would be needed for a few years. If we take a minus 10% return, yeah, we'll have to have additional state contributions. But even by the time we get out to 2029, 2030, they've only grown back to what they were last year. So I think this is indication we're in pretty good shape with the judge's plan. It is healthy. Slide 12 shows really under all these scenarios, you're seeing three, the funded ratio grows, and it tends to grow a little bit more at the start, just because, again, we're bringing in those deferred asset gains. That's why that red line kind of has a higher slope and then flattens out. So, bottom line for the judges, it's I would say in healthy condition to kind of run without having to ask for additional state appropriations.
Okay, I'd like to interrupt you for just a minute. So
Please.
are there any questions about the judge's plan from any of my committee members? I just have one general comment. We did contribute in the budget to the judge's plan this year,
Right.
extra. And the reason we did was, I believe, because we went through the COVID experience. Court cases were down, court fees were down. We've made some corrections to that, and hopefully, I think we're up a couple $100,000 already as a result of those changes. So with that, that's why the projections look the way they do. Is that accurate?
I think, yes, much of this does really is because of that additional funding and the increase in court fees. That is, and then additionally, there is a plan for there to be a up to 5% contribution based on kind of on payroll. We're waiting to see what's going to happen with that, because the asset return was as good as it is. We might not need all of it for sure. Yeah, that's our hope. But yes, those court fees, if they play out as expected, have put us in a much healthier position.
I just wanted to make sure that the committee understood why we did have to spend some money.
Yes.
We did appropriate that. The governor appropriated it actually in the budgeting process. So see no other questions. Let's move on to the state patrol retirement.
All right. So slide 14 again is kind of the big picture summary. The unfunded liability here went from 61 million down to just over 51 million. It's a movement in the right direction. The funded ratio went from 88% to just over 90%. So again, and a movement, you might say, oh, that's 2.4%. 2.4% is a fairly substantial movement, especially in the presence of, we decreased the discount rate some. So we made some assumption changes that worked kind of the other direction. Again, it's a reflection of how strong the asset returns are that have been recognized to this point. As a result, the actuarial contribution rate, what we need to fund the plan, went from just over about 44.5% or 45.5% to 43.75% roughly. Between what the members contribute and the employers contribute, and that covers much of it, but there's still this year roughly 11.3% of pay needed beyond what is coming in from the scheduled sources. And so you can see that the next to last line there shows that there would need to be a supplemental amount of 3.75 million. It was a little over 4 million last year, so a little less needed this year to help move the fund there. Now, additionally, the state, as part of being the employer of these members, contributes as well. And so the total state funding will go from roughly 9.1 million to 8.9 million, fairly flat. The slide 15, I think, shows something that may be, again, encouraging. Is here what's reflected in the blue bars is the scheduled contributions, where the employers put in an amount equal to what the members put in. The red bar is the additional requests from the state. And you can see over the next 3 or 4 years, that number declines and is expected by 2025 to be 0. Again, all assumptions being met. And as slide 16 shows, that's really a long-term trend that we should, once we get there, actually over the foreseeable future, going out 15, 16 years, we would not anticipate the need for any additional state funding. So again, definitely moving in the right direction to where the scheduled amounts are sufficient. Slide 17, just to help us stay aware of what happens if assumptions are not met. Again, the red bar that we've been looking at there. There's a black bar that stays somewhat flat. It maybe declines a little bit over time. That's if we have a 0% return this year. We will still need, under that situation, we would need additional state contributions, for the next 10 years, but at a level of $2.5 million, which is actually less than where we are right now. We still would have enough favorable experience kind of coming through. If we take a minus 10% return this year, contributions will go up. Now, again, minus 10% is pessimistic, but it's a reasonable pessimistic number that could happen, although pretty unlikely. And finally, slide 18 shows that we would expect under really any of these possible scenarios, we still continue to move towards 100% funding. That's partly because we fund the plan. The state, everybody works together and puts the money in that's needed, and when you fund a plan, it gets well funded. And so that discipline that the state has exercised, we can see how, as we anticipate in the future, we're going to be in good shape. In a 10 to 15 years, that's a relatively short time period from a pension perspective. We're moving in the right direction.
So are there any questions about the state patrol? Yes. Senator
Thank you,
Clemens.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir. This is slide 18, and it was the last one of the previous one. It's amazing to me how a 10% drop in one investment year goes out to the next 15 years and still never gets caught up. I don't know if you have any comment about that, how the investment results in 1 year is such a big effect on the future.
Right. Senator, that's a good question because it actually points to something. One of the things that happens with our funding is every year, whatever experience happens, good or bad, we say we're going to make this up either by increasing rates or lowering rates, essentially, and we're going to pay this off over 25 years. It used to be 30 with the bill you passed last year. It's now 25. So there, in a way, if we have something happen that's less than ideal, we don't intend for it to be paid off for 25 years. Okay. Now, hopefully enough something else good happens and we get there sooner. But there is sort of a built into the rules that govern what NPERS does for funding. That's sort of a consequence.
I see. So you don't catch up with that in the next year or two. You're spreading that over 25 years. These eventually, if you went 25, would merge together.
Yes. If we ran out 25 years, everything worked perfectly, it hit 100 dead on.
It'd all go to 100.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any additional questions? Okay, then thank you. Let's move into the school retirement system.
All right, so slide 20. Schools is again sort of a similar picture. One difference is the numbers are a lot bigger. The other difference is this one's not directly funded by the state, and all the school districts are involved in funding this one as well. You can see that the unfunded liability went from 1.2 billion down to 370 million. Okay, as the funded ratio went from 91.7% to 97.4%. Okay, so we are much closer to being on target than we were before. 97.4 feels, again, to an actual, hey, we're feeling pretty good with this. We're very close to being on target. As a result, the actuarial contribution rate that the funds needed last year, we said we need just over 18% of pay to fund this plan, the ongoing benefits and catching up. Now we're at 15.65%. The members put in 9.78%. The districts put in 9.88%. The state puts in 2%. We have a margin. We have a little bit more coming in than what is needed to fund this plan. Okay. Again, we're still not on target, so that extra money comes in, helps us move toward the target at a faster rate. And so we should get to target sooner. This will be kind of the exception to the thing I was about. It takes 25 years. That's if we contribute on target. If we're contributing faster, then we'll get to fully funded faster. In theory, the state is on the hook for any shortfall. There hasn't been a shortfall in how many years. It predates my involvement with this plan. And again, once again, this year, there's no additional state requirement to fund the plan. Slide 21 shows kind of what we expect in the next several years. Largely, everything is pretty flat, just growing the payroll. The largest portion of the funding comes from, again, the school districts, the blue bar in that graph. There's an equal amount from the members, or almost equal amount. They pay 1% less. You can see that there's a whole bunch of different colors there, but some of them don't even really show up on the graph. There's some additional pieces that are funded flow through NPERS over to OSERS to fund some benefits, and they're very tiny, so if you can see it, your optometrist is doing well. Because I can't see, but I know the color's there. So that's what we expect for the next 5 years. And then slide 22 shows the longer term expectation. Again, we don't expect any additional state contributions to be required. In fact, on slide 23, just to kind of help you see how I guess I'd say improbable it is, we said, what would it take to have a situation where we needed an additional state contribution? If in fiscal year 22 we lost 19%, that's a very bad return. Then we would have to, at some point, have an additional state contribution. It might not even be next year, it might be a year or two out before we kick in, but eventually we would need a state contribution. Okay, well, let's say we don't lose 19% next year. That's improbable. What if we think about the next 2 years? If we had 2 years of minus 7%, we would get there as well. Again, it's pretty unlikely. Or 5 years of basically zero, we'd still be, that we wouldn't quite even get to where we need additional state contribution. Or if we had 10 years at 3% return, okay, which would be, again, a less than, a fair, it's not improbable number for 1 year, but to do it 10 years in a row would be pretty unlikely. So under reasonable scenarios, we don't foresee needing additional state contributions to the school system anytime coming up. If everything is otherwise remains as is. Okay. Obviously, if somebody comes through and says, oh, well, let's, put this benefit change in, or let's change this funding source, or whatever, sure, all bets are off that. And you can see on slide 24, again, under kind of all reasonable scenarios, the projected funded ratio grows. Potentially over the next 10 or 15 years, it will be time to revisit things just because those ratios get to be large. But we're not there yet. So that's, I guess, any questions?
Yeah, questions on the school plan? Senator Clements, and I have one as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on slide 23, the minimum returns, you had in slide 4 talked about the real rate of return and the investment return. Which rate of return are those on 23?
This would be compared to the investment rate of return, right, where we expect 7-ish. We'd have to get something much lower.
Okay. And the reason that on 24, everything's going well above 100%. And why is that?
The funding for the plan is based, it's all set in statute. The rates are set in statute, and those rates are currently somewhat above what we need. And so as the contributions come in, they first of all cover what is needed, and then essentially the extra contributions help add some additional
No, it's a
funding.
defined contribution, which is a little more than what we need.
Right.
Whereas the other plans, we adjust the percentage of contribution as needed. Is that a contrast?
So, almost. Okay, very, very close. For instance, the state patrols is kind of maybe the contrast there. The scheduled rates that come in, 16 or 17% from the members, depending on when they're hired, and a matching amount from the employer, currently are not sufficient to fund the plan, so the state puts in an additional amount. Now, our expectation is over the next 4 or 5 years, those amounts will be sufficient, and then the state will not need to contribute. But in the meantime, we're not planning for there to be enough, and long term, those amounts are fairly close to what's needed. Here, the scheduled amounts for the school, once we're 100% funded, give us a little more. I mean, the rates are higher than the current cost of the plan.
So you're planning, the state is in your calculations putting in 2%,
Right.
whether it's really needed or not, and
Yes,
it's
it's because all those numbers are in statute.
it's overfunding it somewhat.
Right.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? I don't have any. I think I was going to address what Senator Clements was getting at, but I just want to make sure that people are aware of the fact that when that 2% was put into place, and I don't know what year it was, in 2013, that was a negotiated agreement between the educators, both the administration and the teachers, that if we put in 2%, they would increase their contribution 2% as well. So once we get above the 100%, if we decide we want to take our 2% away, I think it would be only fair that we ask them to lower their contribution 2%. I'd caution against that. That's way beyond when I'm going to be here. And so I just want people to be aware that that 2% means that we haven't had to pay any ARCs. Well, we are in essence with the 2%, but and that also goes to Omaha's teachers as well. It's not just ours, our plans. The other thing that I just want to comment on, this is more of a commentary than anything. We're very fortunate from the perspective of the fact that we went from 97 to 100% in the judge's plan. We went from 88 to 91% in the patrol plan, and we went from 91 to 97 in the education plan. Those are huge increases. A lot of it has to do with the 30% return on investment, but at the same time, we still use smoothing, so that didn't have a full impact on that. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator. We would expect continued increases. Now, we have two things going on here that we're fortunate is we are continuing to decrease the return assumption and some of the other assumptions, which tends to increase liabilities. But meanwhile, we have deferred gains that we're going to bring in that are going to increase the assets. And so I think we're very fortunate that if everything plays out going forward, we shouldn't feel the pain of that assumption change. I don't think we anticipated that when we said let's phase it over 4 years, but we have kind of this nice match of additional assets and additional liabilities coming in that should keep us, I think, fairly steady for the next several years.
We've made those changes just from a history perspective, we went from 8% to 7.5%, and now we're going down to 7%.
Right.
Those have all taken place since I've been here, since we've been involved. And so those have been very positive, even though it's an increased liability. We're still meeting our obligations. The other thing that I would like to just say is much of this is due to the fact that we have an outstanding investment portfolio. Michael Walden Newman and the Nebraska Investment Council has just done a wonderful job of managing our money for us. We could have gone back to 2008, and at that point in time, they could have panicked and sold and done some stupid things, but they didn't. They've done a tremendous job of managing our investments. And then I can't say enough good about the Public Employees Retirement Board and the NEPRS administration. Randy Gierke and Oren and the board have done a wonderful job of working with this committee to make changes that would have a longer term impact. And that's various number of things that have happened over the last 7 or 8 years, even prior to that. I think Randy and his team and the PERB board deserve a lot of kudos, because just as an example of a change, when we change something for the investments coming, the increase in the investments from the judge's plan, increased fees, that came as a recommendation. We had to figure out how we were going to do that. From the educator's perspective, when we changed the early retirement dates for some and set up separate pools of employees, that came as a result of their recommendation. So they're just doing a wonderful job, and I think that they need to be complimented on that. So is there any other questions? Brent, I appreciate being here today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Is there anybody else that wants to testify? Randy, do you or Oren or Perb have anything? Okay. Well, with that, seeing no other questions, I'm going to close this hearing. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. And our next hearing will start at 3. So if you need to take a few minutes break, you're going to be here for morning. Appreciate everybody being here. We will get the federal tax law compliance audit from Ice Miller here in a minute. It's my understanding that Cecilia will be introducing. This is a hearing from the Retirement Committee. If you're going to come forward, please spell your name and say your name. And as you introduce yourselves, we don't have any pages today. It's going to be somewhat informal, but the report needs to go on the record, and so we'll do so. It's invited testimony only, so we'll have that. And with that, I'm going to open the hearing. My name is Senator Mark Colterman. I'm chair of the committee. I represent Seward, York, Polk, and a little bit of Butler County. The other senators were here earlier but had to leave. We have Kate Allen is our legal counsel, and Katie Quintero is our committee clerk. So with that, Cecilia, would you please make an introduction for us?
Well, good afternoon, Senator Colterman and Retirement Committee legislative staff. My name is Cecilia Carter. That's CECELIACARTER, and I'm the director for the Omaha School Employees Retirement System. As we all recall, Legislative Bill 147, when passed in May of 2021, mandated a compliance audit to be performed on the OSER's pension plan. The Board of Trustees immediately began implementing the necessary steps to ensure the project could meet the mandated timeline. In June of 2021, the law firm of Ice Miller was engaged by the Board of Trustees to perform the compliance audit on the OSER's plan. With me today is Robert Gauss, Esquire of Ice Miller, to present the committee, the OSER's compliance audit report. The compliance audit report was filed electronically with the required agencies on November 14, 2021, and I brought with me today 3 hard copies to leave with the committee for its files. The OSER's board president, Pat Bourne, and I are here and available for any follow-up questions the committee may have following Mr. Gauss's presentation. With that.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Robert Gauss, Gauss, and as Ms. Carter said, I am a partner with the law firm of Ice Miller in Indianapolis, Indiana. My partner, Audra Ferguson Allen, participated in the audit with me, and she was unable to be here today due to testimony and other boards. But I wanted to extend my appreciation for the opportunity to appear before you. A couple of introductory matters. In the introduction, we acknowledge the assistance and support of OSER staff and council, but I would also be remiss if we did not acknowledge that we received cooperation and support from the district's Board of Education and its council. We also received support from the Investment Council when we asked questions about the plan assets and how they are held for investment purposes. I note from your inquiry letter, Senator, that it's clear the report was quickly and thoroughly considered, and that a letter was sent back with responses to some of the questions that you raised. We participated in answering some of those questions. You noted to me before the hearing that the report was long. There was a method to our madness. First, we wanted to be respectful of and fulfill the requirements contemplated by the audit sections under LB 147. Second, the OSER's plan does not have a current favorable determination letter from the Internal Revenue Service. It's our understanding that each of the state plans does. The determination letter program, if you're not familiar with it, is where you submit the plan for review by the IRS, and the IRS gives you back a letter maybe with some give and take, but a letter that says that this plan has been reviewed and meets the requirements under Code Section 401A of the Internal Revenue Code. And so from the IRS's perspective, it's considered a qualified plan. Given the expectations under LB 147 for the future of the plan, we think it's important not just for the state, but for OSERS itself and the Board of Education that the plan receive that level of review from the IRS before anything would happen with it in 2024. Currently, your state plans are not eligible to go in for an updated determination letter because the IRS froze that program. But for any plan that does not already have one, it is still eligible. So what you see, especially in the part of the report that's identified as the tax compliance review checklist, is in essence what we would provide to the IRS if we were submitting the plan for a favorable determination letter. This is a more detailed report than the IRS would have gotten back at the time when it was doing cycle reviews of plans. But this brings the plan current as to all of the qualification requirements under the Internal Revenue Code. And it provides basically a roadmap for the IRS of where each plan provision is, that it was timely adopted. And if it was not timely adopted, we've noted that and suggested a correction procedure for addressing that late amendment. Also, as you saw from our summary, as part of our process, we reviewed board rules and regulations that were prepared by the Board of Education, and we made certain suggested amendments to those. Those have not yet been adopted, but with those proposed amendments, we believe that the plan will be in position to be filed for a favorable determination letter and should receive a favorable ruling from the IRS. Our suggested amendments not only brings the plan current, but it would bring the plan current through both the Secure Act of 2019 and the CARES Act of 2020, so that amendments that aren't yet required but would be required by either the end of 2024 or the middle of 2025 would already be incorporated into the plan. The other part of our report is an operational compliance review. The requirements under LB 147 had a lot of focus on the plan in operation. And so this is where we went through operational factors of the plan as it relates to different qualification requirements under the code, especially as it relates to limits of the amount of compensation that can be considered by the plan, the amount of benefits that can be paid out, required minimum distributions, those parts of the qualification requirements that affect the plan in operation. So, Senator, that's a high-level summary of what we were doing with our audit report. In general, we believe that the plan is in a good place, and with a few minor tweaks should receive favorable review from the IRS.
Okay. Does that complete your report?
It does, yes.
Do you have any questions, Senator Lindstrom? Well, first of all, thank you for coming. I know you made a special trip here to do this, but we appreciate it. And I'd like to say that I appreciate the fact that both the OSERS board and the school board and NEPRS have worked closely as we start this transition. One of the things that has been very important to this committee is the fact that we had a compliance audit completed. And that's extremely important before we begin to take over anything like this. Do you know, to your knowledge, prior to you taking a look at this and doing a compliance audit, has there been any compliance audits in recent years that you're aware of that you could go back and compare what you've done to the present time?
I'm not aware that there was a prior compliance audit, but based on our review of the plan, it was clear that the plan was being updated for compliance purposes. But in terms of whether there was an actual audit review such as this, I'm not aware of one.
And you talk about getting a favorable letter from the IRS. Do you know if, I've had a chance to review this with our legal counsel. Do you know when you say you send in that tax review checklist to the IRS and you work with them to get a favorable letter? Have we ever had a letter on that, or has the plan ever had a favorable letter from the IRS that you're aware of?
It has not, and that's why one of our recommendations is that it be filed, and why I pointed out that it is eligible for filing. Your other plans that the committee oversees are not eligible for updated
I
letters.
understand that.
Yeah.
Not any longer.
Correct.
They were at one time, and I believe they all have favorable
Yes, that's my understanding.
determination letters. Can you speak a little bit to your recommendation of changes in the regulations? You alluded to that you've made some recommendations. Would you kind of, at a high level, talk about those regulation changes that you would recommend that be implemented?
Sure. So the Board of Education provided some board rules and regulations that would apply to the board. And those rules and regulations have a number of tax code sections or components to them. We reviewed and suggested language to bring particular sections in line with the IRS's requirements or expectations for particular language. So for instance, and this was one of the questions that you raised in your letter, in the rollover section where there's a list of what are considered eligible retirement plans, simple IRAs is not included. It's not necessarily required to be included, but it is an eligible retirement plan. We identified that and made that a recommendation for amendment. There were other sections that we went through where we were simply recommending compliance language. Nothing about the rules suggested to us that in operation the plan is doing anything wrong, but if it's going to be submitted to the IRS for review, those rules and regulations would be considered part of the plan document. And we thought that they should be updated to include some language.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I don't know, I hope you can answer this question. We as chairman and legal counsel, we asked for your report. We received our first report on October 28th from, I believe, the legal counsel of the school district. And then later on November 14th, we received a little bit different report. There's a change from the first one to the second one. That came from Cecilia.
Yeah. So the first report was a draft report that we provided to the OSERS board, to OSERS and the board. The Board of Education also had a copy of it. It largely looks the same, but with the final report that we knew was coming to the committee, we changed the format a little bit. We included the introduction and the summary of findings, which were not largely contained within the draft report. And we did some final tweaks to the two main reports, but those are the only differences.
Okay, I appreciate knowing that because it was somewhat confusing when we got those two different reports in. In your compliance audit report, you talk about how you're gonna bring it into compliance, and then you also go on and talk a little bit about the statutory duties to administer the retirement system, that they're in compliance and the tax qualification requirements are gonna be requested. I appreciate that. Do you have do you have any kind of recommendations or amendments that maybe need to be changed in our statutes to bring this plan into compliance with what we're trying to do here? Right? Just asking.
Yeah, so the only thing that we identified really in the statutes where we had recommended possible change is in the mandatory payout of certain account balances and whether or not IRAs would be open for individuals who were non-responsive. That gets to the issue. There are two issues at play. One is the preservation of retirement assets for people. The other is that defined benefit plans, defined contribution plans too, but defined benefit plans will lose track of members or beneficiaries. The IRS recognizes this. In an ERISA context, which governmental plans are not governed by ERISA, but in an ERISA context, the IRS would say to a company, retirement plan, a 401k, for instance, that if you can't find the person, you send the money, you can open an IRA, send the money to the IRA, and then it becomes the IRA administrator's problem to try and find them, to pay out the required minimum distributions. And if they can't, then they have the ability to turn the money over to the state through forfeiture. Governmental plans, we recommend, do not follow that same approach. For one reason, as a defined benefit plan, different than a defined contribution plan, you want to keep the assets in the plan trust so that when the individual is found, those benefits can still be paid to them or their beneficiary. The other reason, which gets a little nuanced, but especially with a state level plan, if the money is forfeited out of the plan back to the state through the treasurer's office or whoever handles lost property, the money is actually reverting to the state, which is the plan sponsor, which the IRS would not want a plan to do because of the exclusive benefit rule under Code Section 401A. So that was the only statute where we thought a recommended amendment would be made. We had noted that, but we didn't see anything else in the statutes that caused us concern.
So that being the case, you made the recommendation, have you given language to the OSER's board to make those changes?
So this goes back to the board rules and regulations. We made suggested language, and I should have mentioned and forgot. My understanding is that the Board of Education has a board meeting on December the 13th where the language we previously proposed is going to be considered. And if there's any additional amendment, for instance, statutory amendment, we would make it through them for a proposal to you.
For us to then bring to the body.
Correct.
And I guess my last question, and this has been a problem, and it was a problem. It's one of the reasons we're here today is that there seems to be, maybe it's just my interpretation, there seems to be confusion about, is it the school board for Omaha Public Schools, or is it the OSER's board? Or, because our intent was to have the OSER's board work together with Omaha Public Schools. So your client, is it Omaha Public Schools or is it the OSER's board?
Our client for this part of our work was OSER's reporting through to the OSER's board
Okay,
with the assistance of OSER's staff. We were asked this week to prepare an engagement letter to the Board of Education for consideration of the follow-up recommendations that we had made, the filing of a determination letter, a correction, and the regulations. And I believe that those are going to be considered by the Board of Education at their meeting on December 13th.
in conjunction with the OSER's board?
I
At
can't,
the recommendation of the OSER's board, that's where I'm coming from.
my belief is yes. I can't answer that specifically.
Thank you. I'll find out later. Thank you. In your review of the plan, this will be my last question unless Senator Lindstrom has a question. In your review of the plan, who has the statutory duty to administer this plan? Is it the OSER's board or is it the public school board?
In our review of the plan prior to, the plan terms prior to LB 147, it's the OSER's board was our interpretation of who's responsible for administering. And then under LB 147, the boards are supposed to work together. That was our understanding from it. And so I think there are co-fiduciary roles there between the OSER's board and the Board of Education.
Okay, appreciate that. Senator Lindstrom, do you have any questions?
You covered it.
Okay, I don't have any additional questions. I really do appreciate you coming. And I would like to thank the OSER's board as well as Omaha Public Schools for working on this. And it's important that and also NEPers, it's important that as we move forward, we get all these questions answered.
Understood.
Because we're going to be taking over the administration of a plan that needs to be functioning in the highest regard.
Agreed.
So, appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Logan.
Thank you. Senator Colsterman, Senator Lindstrom, legal counsel. My name is Cheryl Logan, Cheryl Logan. I'm the superintendent of the Omaha Public Schools, where we serve approximately 52,000 students. I want to start my testimony by thanking the members and staff of this committee. In my time as superintendent, I've had the opportunity to work with all of you as we continue to do everything that we can to solidify the Omaha Schools Employees Retirement System. As you know, this has been a transformational year for OSERS. I want to thank each of you publicly for your support of OSERS and your efforts to ensure the passage of LB 147, which transfers the management of OSERS to the Public Employee Retirement Board. The Board of Education and I are incredibly grateful for Senator Colterman's leadership and commitment to getting the pivotal legislation passed. Today's hearing is for the presentation of the compliance audit, which we've just heard, of the Class 5 School Employees Retirement System. I am aware that this committee had a number of questions about the compliance audit itself and what the Board of Education's planned approach will be moving forward. We worked closely with the Board of Trustees and with ICE Miller to provide you with those answers this past Monday. I hope our responses were to your satisfaction. The purpose of the balance of my testimony today is very straightforward. I simply want to convey that it is the intent of both the Board of Education and the Board of Trustees to implement all of the recommendations of the compliance audit. To that end, we have asked ICE Miller to assist with the implementation, and I am pleased to report that ICE Miller has agreed to assist in this endeavor. I anticipate that the Board of Education will formally approve the Miller's engagement on Monday, 13 December. The Board of Education and the Board of Trustees will continue to work together on implementation of the ICE Miller recommendations. The implementation of the internal recommendations are straightforward and will occur in the coming months. We anticipate that the completion of the IRS determination letter process will likely take significantly longer, perhaps into the third or fourth quarter of the next year. As the transfer of management of OSERS to the PERB continues, we will keep you informed and the committee apprised of the transition process and progress. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
First of all, thank you for being here.
Sure.
When you started out, you said you educate, what, 52,000 students?
Yeah,
In the Omaha
do.
Public Schools?
we do.
You have a big job.
Some might say so.
And I sense that you're looking forward to the time when you're out of the retirement plan business.
Significantly looking forward to that time, yes. There's not a word strong enough in the English language lately to say that. Probably need to go to a language that has more precision. But yeah,
I don't have any questions.
Thank you.
I appreciate your willingness to work with us on
absolutely,
this.
always.
Are there-
Senator Lindstrom?
Senator Lindstrom, do you have any questions?
All right, thank you. It was great to see you, and
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah. Is there anybody else who'd like to testify? If not, I'm going to close the hearing. I appreciate everybody coming. Merry Christmas.
let's just tap that, see if they hit the marks. They hit the marks.
The turn,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay.
cool. All right.
So then when we turn that back off,
They should.